Hello, everybody. I want to thank you for welcoming me. My name is Solana, and I work for a part of Mozilla that's called the Insights team of Mozilla. We work on research, and my background is actually in journalism, and particularly in the intersection of where technology meets digital activism. I've been working with online communities for many, many years on citizen journalism projects, on translation projects, working with volunteers to figure out how to use the internet for good around the world. And you see I've put a rainforest in the background of the slides. And part of the reason is that when we talk about the internet being healthy at Mozilla, the way we're thinking about it is the internet as an ecosystem, kind of like a jungle or a rainforest, something that actually adapts to what humans are doing, something that can be out of balance or in balance, but isn't like, there's never a perfect state of health. It's something that's living and alive and depends on a lot of different factors for its overall state. I put Firefox logo there. Most of you will be familiar with Firefox. A lot of people don't know that Firefox is run by a nonprofit organization. Mozilla is a nonprofit organization, and I work for the part of the organization that's called the Foundation, where we do a lot of these different nonprofit activities. Like I said, my background is journalism. I'm a beginner at Python, but I wrote my first Python joke for this talk. And I showed it to a friend earlier, and he said, shouldn't unhealthy and healthy be a string? Shouldn't it be in quotes? And the answer is no, it's variable. And part of what I'm trying to do in my project, which is the Internet Health Report, is figure out what kind of indicators should we be looking at to measure if the internet is healthy or unhealthy. Knowing that there isn't such a thing as a perfect state of health, what can we do to make sure that it becomes as healthy as possible, that it can be healthier? And we have a core belief that because technology is created by humans and used by humans, that we can really make it better and make decisions about how the effect of technology is in the world. Mozilla is guided by a manifesto, which is, I suppose, unusual for a large organization or a big tech product. But we have 10 principles, and I put a couple of them up here. The main one, for me at least, is that the internet should be a global public resource, that it should be open and accessible. But you can also see that our principles extend from how the internet should be used to how the internet should be coded. And part of our philosophy is also that part of the way we work together and collaborate together has an effect on the outcome of our technical work and our human work. So yes, we're an open organization. It's open source code, open processes, open. Around the time that I joined Mozilla about 5 years ago, which was as part of the first team that was going to be creating this Internet Health Report, it was 2017, and it was before Cambridge Analytica, before the so-called tech backlash that I think we're all more familiar with now. But there was this growing awareness of the fact that it wasn't enough just to say that the internet should be open, because more and more we're becoming aware of the problems that exist on the internet. The hate speech you find on the internet, the attacks you find in open source communities, the racism that's embedded in so many of our structures and our processes. And so if we still want to maintain what's good about open, how can we start thinking about the role of technology where we aren't just making things open for openness sake or decentralized for decentralized sake? How can we start listening to different communities, and especially, I think, thinking about it in terms of this ecosystem. It's not just a technical question. It's not just something for technical communities to decide. We need to work together with policymakers, with activists, with social scientists. We need to be working together across many different fields in order to make an impact and a difference on how the internet works for the world. And so we created this term called Internet Health. It's a framework. It's not perfect. But we decided, let's try and look at these like 5 issues. And these are the 5 issues that we were working on. Is it safe? You know, privacy and security, openness. I talked a little bit about who is welcome, who's included, and what do you actually need to know to succeed? Is it enough that you're just connected to the internet, or do you also have the ability to create and build and write and learn? And who controls it? And I think this aspect of who controls it and who has the power over the decisions that get made about technology is something that we're becoming more and more, I think, better at engaging with other people on. So we've had 4 editions of the Internet Health Report, and the next one is coming soon. The 2022 report is forthcoming, and there's going to be a couple of sneak peeks from it in this talk. But yeah, it ended up becoming a sort of a compilation of research from a lot of different sources and from different countries, and stories from people who were making a difference. Because it was difficult to come up with a kind of indicator for all of the internet's health all over the world. And a lot of times when we would look at a metric or an indicator, like this one, nearly half of the world is still offline. This is from the 2020 report, but the count is overall accurate still. You could flip this sentence and you could say half of the world is online, and that's good news. Or you could write the headline that half of the world is still offline, and it's bad news. And for a lot of the things that you can point out or highlight about the internet, there is this, is the glass half full or is it half empty? It all depends on who you are and at what point you're looking at it, and from which part of the world, from which vantage point. But this is one thing that we return to often. How many people are online? And of course, it's not just a choice that people make not to be online. Here's another statistic which looks at where in the world is a smartphone accessible compared to what average wages people earn. And you can see the top one here in Sierra Leone, you have to work an average of 194 days in order to be able to afford a smartphone. And these discrepancies are magnified, you know, in terms of individual countries, but you see these kind of inequalities in every country in the world. Every country in the world has part of the population that is not able to get online. And here's another one that shows something about internet speed on the left and internet cost on the right. And part of what this shows is not just that the internet is less affordable in Africa, but it's also the slowest. And you have that trend across the world that the slowest and poorest quality internet is also the most expensive in real terms. And these kinds of things aren't accidental. And it's not that they're not fixable. There are a lot of policy decisions and technical decisions and commercial decisions that go into addressing inequalities like this. Here's another one, that the internet is shut down every single day somewhere in the world. This statistic was from 2019 and looks at how the internet is also used for control and oppression and to silence people. You know, sometimes they say that the internet gets shut down because people have exams in universities or in high schools and they want to cut down cheating, and then they shut down the internet for everybody. Sometimes it can be because there's an election or there are protests or national security, but the reality is that when the internet is shut down, often human rights abuses happen. And often important things that need to be said or documented go unheard and unseen by the rest of the world. And there are ways to combat internet shutdowns, but again, it's something that requires a lot of collaboration from different types of people working together and people in different countries caring about the overall health of the internet and the internet ecosystem. Here's one that's a little bit closer to home for all of us. Hate speech, harassment, the way that women and young girls all over the world face an enormous amount of harassment. And these numbers are even higher when it comes to people of color or people who are of non-binary genders. These are also a result of decisions at tech companies, by policymakers, by people online and how they care for each other and each other's communities. These are all things that in some ways both get worse and better all the time, because I think we're getting smarter about researching these problems and talking about the problems and acknowledging the problems, but they still exist and they still amplify in other contexts. And when you're looking all over the world, it's very difficult to say, oh, this is definitely getting worse or this is definitely getting better, if you want to always also keep an eye on the things that are really working. You know, if you're looking at all the sea of terribleness, I think it's really easy to lose sight of the things that are being done to make things better. And so in the Internet Health Report, we pivoted a little bit to focus more on what can be done and talk a little bit less about everything that's going wrong. And like I said, we'd also discuss who has power over the internet. And of course, the biggest tech companies are something that we talk about a lot. This is again from the 2020 report, but it shows the blue ones are the 7 sort of biggest internet companies. The numbers have changed a little bit in the past 2 years, but you have Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Facebook, Tencent, and Alibaba. And what you have here is not just a list of the biggest tech companies. These are the biggest companies in the world. They're bigger than all other companies in terms of market capitalization. Bigger than most oil companies, bigger than McDonald's, bigger than banks. The power of these companies has grown so enormous, and the way that they consolidate power is really something, I think, a matter of concern for those of us who want the internet to be a living and breathing space that is adaptable to our actions. And when you look at these companies and how here is the worldwide market share of cloud service companies. And you have Amazon is the orange one, Microsoft is blue, yellow is Alibaba, red is Google. And the point here is that even smaller tech, even nonprofit tech, even the alternative projects, a lot of times, you probably know that from your own work, all roads lead to these big companies. Because that's an area where they have consolidated power in terms of storage and computing power. This is a map of undersea internet cables, and the lines in dark and black are the ones that Google, Microsoft, and Amazon and Facebook have invested in. So you see, it's not just the consumer layer of the internet where they dominate, or the code, or the AI, or the cloud computing. It's also the very cables on which all our communication travels. The dominance is really, really strong. And so it's not to say that everything about big tech is bad. It also enables incredible things. We all use these companies for the most part every single day, and are dependent on them in different days and can be thankful for the fact that they exist for many, many purposes. The problem is when the power gets so all-consuming and when they don't listen, when people are saying, it's too much, you're taking too much data, you're not protecting our privacy, you're not moderating content properly, you're not, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we think about what can be done, there are things in the regulation space that are happening. There are staff within these companies themselves that are protesting different things. This was in 2020, but this is based on research from 2016 to 2020 that showed how many protests were increasing within tech companies of staff who were protesting military contracts or contracts with oil companies that were bad for the environment, of labor disputes, malpractice, sexual harassment, a whole lot of things where staff within the companies are saying, hang on, let's push back. And I think it also coincides with this backlash, tech backlash that you see, of course, in the media and that you see, in popular conversation. But what do we do other than complain? Mozilla has a vision for the web and a lot of this has to do with how Firefox is built, but also how Mozilla, the points of view that Mozilla represents in like standards, internet standards committees, and in how we encourage other people to build and design. Things like ubiquitous encryption, or how interoperability should function, or that products online should be accessible, and that you should be able to internationalize them and change the language of them. These are the kinds of things that aren't or shouldn't be seen as an attack on big tech, but that create some protections to make sure that others can coexist and that others can design and build and suggest alternatives to how the big companies tend to do things. We're also, in terms of our own product, trying to think more about how can we use the data that we have in a responsible way and kind of create some new language or some new standards about what you can do with data. For many, many years, it was lean data only, privacy only, and I think we're trying to get a little bit more nuanced of meeting the world where it is. And so this is a project, Mozilla Rally, where you can download a plugin and choose to share your data with researchers who are researching, for instance, how Facebook's algorithms work. Like, what content is Facebook showing you? You can share data about that. There are research projects about other things. People who are trying to figure out what are the big companies doing and not telling you about. So this is an effort to involve users who aren't technical experts in the fight to make the internet more transparent for everyday internet users. We also have this project that I was involved in, which takes Firefox telemetry, which it sends health pings to the telemetry to see, for instance, when there are outages around the world, or like signals that could be outages. We compile them, and we've created a private data set so that you can document where internet outages seem to be happening in different parts of the world. And these could be shutdowns, or they could be electricity outages, or they could be different things. But in any part of the world where the Firefox population is big enough, and a city or country population that is big enough, you can see signals of outages in this data set and use that to document when shutdowns happen, even if governments maybe are saying that they didn't. So over the past couple of years, we've been thinking about all these issues that we consider under the banner of internet health, and decided that it makes sense to focus a little bit more. We were thinking, how can we have an impact on the next generation of the internet? What are going to be the big questions that are coming down the pipeline? And where is there still uncertainty, or where is the thinking not so advanced in terms of what we can do to make a difference? And so we've really focused on artificial intelligence as an area that needs a lot of work. Because, as you all know, it's affecting every single industry, every single company, or not every single company, but every single type of industry, commercial industry, government decisions. It's so ubiquitous, and there's still so little known about the risks and potential benefits, I think, for different communities. This is, again, the annual revenues of tech companies, and I just want to show, even over the course of the pandemic, how the revenues of tech companies have just been growing and growing and growing. And the bottom layer is Amazon, and their revenue is the biggest of these companies that we looked at before. And I think it's interesting to talk about them because AI is so central to how they're making money in every single revenue category, whether it's search, whether it's advertising, whether it's the cloud computing. subscription services, AI is really core to how they're making money. In Facebook as well. This is a blog post from just 2 days ago that says that AI is now, the AI department is not a separate thing anymore at Meta. They're going to be introducing AI throughout the company and just beginning to work differently on this. And so that AI is a bigger component of how they're thinking about their technology and their product. And this happens at the same time as we know that gender diversity is terrible at these companies. It's also terrible in open source communities, but it's really bad in the Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples, and the Microsofts of the world, and the same for racial and ethnic diversity. These graphs show something about how it's changed over 6 years. So the first bar is 6 years ago, and the second one is how it looked in 2020, I believe. You can just see that the point is it's changing very, very slowly, despite the fact that everybody knows it's a problem, despite the fact that they say that they're going to address it. These things are moving very slowly, even though we know that AI is having a disproportionate effect on people of color, that the benefits and the harms of these technologies are not evenly distributed. And we're talking about things like the soap dispensers in public bathrooms that don't work for people with dark skin. It's those kinds of things that discrimination becomes an aspect of everyday life, or the facial recognition that you need to use to file your taxes that doesn't recognize your face if you're a woman of color. These types of problems, that your voice recognition, your voice assistant won't understand you if you speak with an accent, or if you're a woman, etc. And what we have more and more is this reliance on artificial intelligence in particular to make decisions that are really important to people's lives. And we have this enormous amount of confidence in the technology to be able to make decisions of this magnitude. And so you have facial recognition technologies and predictive technologies to predict where there's going to be crime, or to recognize who is a criminal suspect. And you have that all over the world. And the most advanced of these technologies for surveillance and control get tested on the most vulnerable people. They get tested on refugee communities in refugee camps all over the world. They get tested on communities of color or where there's poverty. Everywhere in the world, people are affected by this, whether they are online or offline. These are issues of the internet that are just growing and growing in importance and danger to some extent. And so, again, when we're talking about who is going to be benefiting from these technologies, this is a statistic that will be in the next Internet Health Report. It's from a report from Stanford University, but it shows who is making private investments in AI in terms of countries. And you see the United States and China and the UK are leading, and you see the rest of the countries are just following in the pack. This is also one that's forthcoming from a research paper that's called The Values Encoded in Machine Learning Research. And it shows for the 100 most cited academic papers on artificial intelligence, the amount of big tech affiliation in those papers. And so these are the types of papers that are presented at conferences and that get cited around optical recognition and machine learning. And you can see from 2008 to 2019 how big tech power is growing and how much they are a part of creating the narrative around what technology should be used for and what kind of value should be embedded in technology. Is it about making money? Is it about efficiency? Or is it also about ethics? Or like, who is it that is talking about AI and having the most, having their voices heard the most? This is another one based on a paper that's called Reduced, Reused, and Recycled: The Life of a Data Set in Machine Learning Research. And it shows the frequency of data sets that are used for validation, performance, validating, for benchmarking, sorry. So for performance benchmarking in AI research papers, for instance, to test if a machine learning model is working well, it's the same data sets that are used over and over and over again. And those data sets come from a very small handful of countries, and the majority of them come from about 12 elite organizations in the US, in Hong Kong, and in Germany. And so this is a distorted map because the point is to emphasize who is not at the table when it comes to having an impact, like a strong voice in how these technologies are developed and how we assess whether they are appropriate for the different use cases. And it doesn't mean that there aren't data sets in the rest of the world that could be used for benchmarking. It's that we've decided that there is a standard that involves these specific data sets over and over and over again, even when there are also researchers that are pointing to serious problems with bias and discrimination within them. So, how do we make AI more trustworthy? Mozilla has been working on this theory of change, which is a really complicated sort of a process of thinking about, well, if we really want to make an impact on something this big all over the world, what are the different things that we can do as an organization? And how can we bring more people together to discuss this? Because nobody has all the answers on all these things. But where we want to be focusing is on shifting industry norms, building new tech products that can set an example for what we want to see. We want to generate demand from consumers to ask for more and better and different things. And we want regulations and really incentives for technology to be built in different ways. And at its core, it's about giving people agency over the technologies that they use, even when it's AI, and transparency and accountability from the AI that's used, not just by big tech, but about all the technology that we use in everyday life. So I'll run through a couple of the different things that we're doing. This is a project where we work with computer science university departments, collaborations with social science, to talk to the next generation of computer scientists about ethics and about the real life effect of technology all over the world. And we ran this in the first year in the United States, and now in this next year we're going to be working with universities all over the world. And part of this is also about telling students what kinds of questions they should be asking at recruitment interviews about the companies that they might work for, around diversity, around ethics, around what they might be expected to work on. Common Voice is another really lovely project that involves really hundreds of people working in different languages. I think we're up to 88 languages, or might be more. But it's ordinary people who can contribute their voice to an open data set of voices that can be used to teach machines to understand how people speak. So if you speak a language that doesn't have a Siri for it, or doesn't have a Cortana for it, or if you come from a country where, let's say, there's low digital literacy and you want people to be able to speak to their devices, speak to their computers, who has the technology and who has a financial incentive to make technologies for minority languages? Not so many people. So we create the tools for people to be able to make their own, and we give it away for free to encourage more creativity and more development outside of the companies that have lots and lots of money to do this. We have this project, which, similar to the Mozilla Rally project that I showed earlier, is about trying to reverse engineer the recommendation algorithm of YouTube. So it's a plugin that you can download to Firefox, where if you see a video on YouTube that you regretted seeing, because it has false information or hateful information, inappropriate sexual content, or something that's targeting children in a bad way, then you can click a button and share the pathway that you took to get to that video with the Mozilla research team. And we're trying to figure out what percentage of these videos that people regret seeing are actually being recommended by YouTube itself. And how can we begin to create tools within the browser to let people have more control over what they're being shown. And it's part of, I think, our activism of trying to demand that these companies are more transparent and share more information with researchers so that we can work together on figuring out how to make the internet ecosystem safer for people all over the world and in different languages. We've been doing work with artists who create these creative, interactive experiences to raise more awareness about the risks and danger of artificial intelligence in different contexts. Let's see, one is, for instance, a game where you have a job interview and you answer some questions and it tells you how your grade, your score, and how you're scored based on what you answer. There's an imaginary dating game also that explores how algorithms are working in terms of matchmaking and what kinds of prejudices go into that sort of technology. And this one, Future Wake, is one I find really inspiring and sad in a way. It flips this idea of predictive policing technology, and they created a model, an imaginary scenario where there's a predictive technology to predict where the police is next going to shoot an innocent civilian based on existing data in data sets. And this one with this logo is from a project called Melalogic, where a researcher is creating a data set of black and dark skin images for better diagnosis by dermatologists, because many of the data sets that are used by dermatologists only contain images of white skin, and that has really serious ramifications in a diagnostic situation. Creating alternatives, pooling data together, doing things with images, doing things with creativity. We have these open, trustworthy AI working groups that you can apply to join, where people bring a project, bring an idea, and get to work together with others on thinking about how they can make it better. How can the voice assistant of the future be more private, for instance? Or how can we think about what AI regulation should look like in Africa or in countries where the language choices would be different than talking about trustworthy or ethics or whatever we've invented in the English sphere. And then we have this project called the Data Futures Lab, where we're also looking at how can we think differently about data and data ownership. Who gets to collect and who gets to have control over it? We have projects that get grants, researchers that collaborate with us, projects like where the workers from the gig work economy, drivers, collect their own data to figure out whether Uber and Lyft are actually giving them the terms that they are promised, where they are able to collect data and sell it themselves to public authorities, where they're able to use it as a sort of bargaining power, to gain power, and where data isn't just seen as a source of exploitation. A whole lot of projects that are thinking about collaboratives and cooperatives, different types of regulation that would be needed to allow patients to join their data together and for the patients to decide how the medical industry can use their data to make their research. Things like that. I can only encourage you to engage with the Mozilla Festival, where again, it's not about Mozilla deciding everything or choosing everything, but it's really about, this is an important moment and an important time for us to come together and discuss this with many communities, with people who speak many different languages. This festival happens every year. It's entirely volunteer-led, and it's really lovely. So you should check it out and join if you're interested in exploring more of these topics further. So you saw a couple of data slides from the next Internet Health Report. It's coming out in July, and this year it's actually going to be a podcast. I know we call it a report, but it is more of a storytelling and a conversation-starting project, publication. So if you want to make sure not to miss this podcast that is coming out, where we're talking about people who are building AI in better ways all over the world, you can subscribe to the old podcast and then be alerted when the new one comes out in July. So yeah, we'll be talking about bias, surveillance, health, spatial justice, discrimination. That was all I had to share with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Solana, was wonderful. And last slide was actually impressive because at lunch we talk about the different podcasts and different people that will be guests and participate in the podcast. They're very amazing case studies to take inspiration of. So I can't wait. I'm the first one that waits for the new season of the podcast and also for the Internet Health Report. It was on. Okay, so thank you. And so one question was about a lot of problems that seems to be affected by the lack of diversity, especially also related to AI algorithm. What's the roots, in your opinion, of this lack of diversity? If you have got your opinion about the article that you've been editing and the exposure that you had to different purposes?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer because it's about the lack of diversity in so many different fields, not even just in the field of tech or in these particular companies. It has to do with power also, and where power exists and where money exists, and the historic inequalities that are all over the world. But I do think it's one of the key things to solve. And the problem is, it's not just about hiring a lot of people who are women or hiring a lot of people who are people of color. It's also about creating entirely different types of products or types of projects, because it's about seeing things from a different perspective, and it's about creating something that is different. And that is part of why it's such a difficult thing for organizations to change, because when you have ethics researchers who come to Google and say, well, some of the main algorithms that you're using for your search engine reinforce racist stereotypes, it's very uncomfortable. And nobody wants to hear that. And so it's a mix, it's not just about hiring, it's about building differently and listening differently and being willing to make different types of technologies.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another question related to that is related to something that happened just last years ago, so about the pandemic itself. So different big companies start to write the narrative on how we interact. So, for example, big companies service big products that are used by any of us in the last years. So, I know also in Mozilla Festival they try different kind of interactions, and I want to know your point of view. We want to know your point of view on how can be rewritten, how we can socially engage online, aside of what the big tech is going to narrate and decide for as tools, but also as a new way to be developed and created.
You mean different social media?
From social
tools.
media to social interaction on internet in general, how we approach each other on the on internet.
Another really big question. I don't know. I think at the heart of it is really about exploring alternatives and being willing to try different things. I haven't got a good answer for that. I think part of it is also at the consumer level, like refusing to keep going with the way that things are. So when there are campaigns, or when you do have privacy options, or when you can choose to have your data deleted, you know, it's something to do, something to protest, but the reality is we're also dependent on these companies that it's difficult to create a space for something else. And the smaller alternatives, you know, sometimes they have the disadvantage of then not being as secure because they don't have the same amount of resources that the big companies do to protect and encrypt and continuously update software projects. So it's a big dilemma. And I think part of it is, you know, part of the answer is interoperability, and maybe even in terms of regulation, making sure that interoperability makes it possible for you, you know, to port your data from place to place, or to be able to interact with people who are on different systems, or having different rules for what type of data should be, you know, available to these companies to do whatever they want with.
Yeah, that's very true, unfortunately. And something related that has been asked that has been called a vicious cycle in a way. So most of the mentioned problems originate from underrepresented minority, and also these reflect on data set themselves. And then in order to build a new data set about minority, it needs to be funding, is to be the more resources in terms of technology, but also in terms of human resources. And then who has it? The big touch. So what's one of the solutions? Could be giving more funding, more exposure to the smaller effect, the smaller projects. Common Voice is probably one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix of different things. And I think it's also worth mentioning that vulnerable people can be all of us. You don't have to be poor to be vulnerable, because we are all vulnerable in different contexts. We just did a big publication about a research project on mental health apps, the types of apps that you download and then you talk to them about your problems, and it could be a chatbot or an app, and it gives you advice, it helps you meditate. And we did an analysis of the privacy and security of them, and it's atrocious. The security is terrible. The data practices are terrible. They compile and sell this data for the vast majority of the companies that are like very popular in-demand apps that are even shared by employers with their staff in order to, you know, promote wellness, and then data is shared with the employers about how people are using it and such. So I think mental health is like a good example of a situation that we can all be affected by, where we're all very vulnerable. It is data that shouldn't be shared or just sold or used for profit. And then what I think your question was referring to is when you have data that's missing about certain populations, for instance, or it could be data about indigenous languages or such, then I think, yes, you need funding for people to be able to create their own data sets and to be able to have control over their own data sets. And even in Common Voice, we have made everything public domain, so anybody can use it. And there are some communities who are saying that they don't want to participate because they want to have more control over how that data is used out in the real world. So it's also about, I think, stepping back from the idea that you can have a one-size-fits-all approach for everything. So you need to have more targeted interventions that are more responsive to individual communities, and that is, you know, that is difficult to do and complicated and requires a lot of conversation and different choices in terms of how you build the technology. But I think we need to be aware of how important it is to get right, because the way we think about building technology is building something that other people can use and that they can use however they want. But that is a risk, right? That is not just 100% positive. That also means, there's tension there. And so that is part of what I think we as an organization, but also as open source, community need to keep exploring, is how can we be open in a better way with all that we know now about the risks and with the way that we're all connected now in a way that we didn't used to be.
Yeah, thank you very much. And has been part of the different conversation in the Common Voice project. It's really interesting to hear in just one call the different opinion of really country of any part of the world together and address these critical topics that you just mentioned. Thank you very much. Another important topic that was mentioned was about harassment. And someone suggests how a verified ID to access, to log in different social media can eventually lower down the bar for harassment. And if you have any more opinion on that, any particular way to develop that could be included to lowering down before?
Yeah, I mean, I think as they say, that it's not conclusive that knowing who everybody is online would make it safer. There's also a very strong case to be made for the fact that anonymity is something that is very important for people to maintain online. And there's also research that shows that anonymity doesn't automatically make things more hateful. A lot of people are very hateful and terrible under their own name and without using assumed, it's true, without using any kind of assumed personality or identity. A lot of people are proud to be hateful. And so who do you protect the most by having anonymity in place? And so I think, yes, there could be some kind of, I think identity and personal data is something that we need to think about a lot. I think the more exciting type of work is the type that keeps your data in your phone or keeps your data in your browser or on your computer and enables you to do things and interact with people without having to share that data with others. And so, I mean, I think those are some of the things that could be really exciting about the next generation of AI and technology.
No, that's true. And just a follow-up about that, if you have a magic wand about reinforcing rules inside platforms in general, again, against harassment, do you think that, well, we just talked about the fact that you mentioned right now, so the things that people have identity of being proud. So what can be rules beyond code of conduct that can be implemented inside platforms itself?
I think it's again, if you're looking at it from an ecosystem approach, if you're looking at the whole system, then I think you also have to address the fact that content moderators are terribly paid, terribly treated in their work, that it's a very intransparent and unjust way of dealing with this problem. And so you have thousands of people around the world working in secrecy who have post-traumatic stress syndrome from seeing all these terrible things, and companies that are profiting enormously on the backs of their work. And I mean not just the big tech companies, but also the consulting companies that work as middle managers of the people who do this kind of work. And the other thing that happens is that when you have a company, for instance, like Facebook, that has many more users in India, for instance, than in the United States, how much do you think they use in terms of resources on content moderation in the US versus India or Brazil or Indonesia, where they have so many users, and they just aren't protecting them or taking the responsibility as seriously as they are in the power centers of the world, in the United States or in the UK, where they'll make special libraries for political advertising or special transparency projects or verified check marks, in the case of Twitter. And then for the entire continent of Africa, Twitter will have only one person working on policy related topics. right? And Facebook will have 3 people working for 58 countries and in multiple, dozens of languages. And so you have this imbalance where once you're looking at this on a global scale, I think these are companies that make billions and billions and billions of dollars of profit. Do they need to make that much money, or do we need to demand that they take their responsibility more seriously? Or do we say, of course it's not, it's an unenviable task. They're never going to get it perfect because, hate speech exists beyond social media and propaganda exists outside of social media, but we could make it better. And we could make it work better for other languages too.
Yeah, thank you. Another question related to the big touch in a way. So we touched the point, even in national ways where internet was blocked, but also the roles of big touch in terms of surveillance and the action that can be taken to block a protest eventually. So in order to have a get around about that, do you think, what's in your opinion, the best way to still bring awareness, eventually protest is a more ethical way, in a way that is not blocked, and in a way that the big touch can't directly act on it?
So surveillance in what way? Sorry?
Surveillance in a way that big touch play a role in that, and play a role also in terms of blocking protests that could be helpful protests. Mm-hmm. So what's a way to bring more awareness and spread the word in a way that is avoiding being blocked and reach the goal that had the protest, the awareness needs to be...
Like censorship, you mean? Or
also, yeah. Any kind of protest for, I think it was for security and but also for social movement that could be lead to a positive change. Yes.
Again, difficult question to answer for the entire internet. I think it's about having different avenues for different things and making sure that nobody has all of the control of the pipeline so that you can circumvent, so that you have a way to use your VPNs to get around censorship, or that you have a way to document when internet shutdowns are happening, or you have a way to know when there is an internet shutdown, who caused it. Was it accidental? Was it on purpose? How long will it last? Who ordered it? There's a lot that can be done both by research community and regulators and tech community and activists working together to try and figure out, the protection of free speech in different contexts online. Yeah.
So it could be like a critical mass across different platforms, different community that really are leveraging the same messages over and over, can be make the change.
Well, it's when you have individual platforms that have so much power. I mean, when Facebook is the owner of the leading social media apps and messaging apps, then again, it becomes very difficult to get around them when your entire, personal business might be set up around them. So it is about having alternatives. I do think that there's a role for the web to play in this, and where the web is still, I think, with everything going on, is a space where we are able to do a lot of things still. Yeah.
So one last question before the last few words. You've been showing some data about accessibility of internet. Also, the Internet Health Report will be available in the mid-July, after the second part of July. Very interesting question was about if there is any data, any research data about people with disability, cognitive disability, in terms of access of the internet, and eventually if there is any action eventually to collect that and to act on it in order to preserve this kind of access as well.
There is some, I have seen some, but it's something that we actually haven't covered extensively in the health report so far. But I think it's an important topic, and something for all of us to think about is, when you make tech products that are more accessible or created with people who have different diversities, it becomes better for everybody. It becomes faster for people. It becomes easier to use. In every single way, it's an advantage for all internet consumers, not just for people who have different disabilities.
Yeah, thank you very much, Solana. And what we were talking about just before, also something to let everyone think about is to rethinking about priorities. We are building new technology, we are going to direction of AI, built-in AI, but without a direct accessibility of internet for everyone, we are building technologies just for the few. So these kind of reports are quite important to leverage that and make sure that we're building technology that can be work, for example, for low connection as well. So always be ready for that.
Yeah. I think most of the time we're very focused on our own projects or our own things. And once in a while, it's good to just step back and think about what role do we want to play in the ecosystem and what values do we want our work to leave with everybody else. So, yeah.
That's super. So for me, for PyCon Italia, also for Mozilla Italia, that love to be here. And if you want to connect, feel free to pick me or Solana. A huge thank you and another great round of applause for Solana.